again, if people subscribe to your podcast, they probably would have known that this was a possibility because I remember listening to your podcast. I don't be surprised if this happens.
Yeah.
So I wanted to kind of get your initial reaction to this trade. Do you think it was a good trade for the Detroit Pistons?
I don't think it was a bad one. Do I think it was a good one? That will determine what Quentin Grimes' knee situation is like, how Quentin Grimes impacts winning in Dallas. I like Quentin Grimes. I like the idea of Quentin Grimes. I like what Quentin Grimes did his second season in New York. But he struggled to play his last year in New York. He obviously came to Detroit injured and only played in 6 games and really only had one good offensive game in those 6 games. I think it's easy to people to forget. Like most front office guys who come in don't value players the same way that the previous guy did. And I think that's probably a sign of that. But listen, Tim Hardaway is a guy who, first of all, they did the trade for the picks more. They're getting 3 seconds, one of which could be literally the first pick or in day 2 or the 5th pick in day 2. Like it's going to be a top 7 day 2 pick, in my opinion, because I don't think the Raptors are going to be very good. So that's not a bad pick. And you see how the CBA has affected teams. I mean, listen, AJ Griffin was had for the 44th pick. So you could easily package 2 of those and move into the first round. And I think fans would, it looks a lot better if it's like the Pistons traded Quentin Grimes for Tim Hardaway Jr. and the 24th pick in the 2026 NBA draft, right? But it's basically equivalent to that. But I also understand the group who's like, I'd rather see what Grimes provides. And he's younger, has more upside, better defender than Hardaway, has had good shooting seasons. I'm not going to discredit Hardaway's consistency for 10 years or whatever it's been now. But I think it was important for Detroit, one, to get somebody who's a consistent shooter, to get an expiring contract to go with the picks, but also Tim Hardaway Jr. plays. Not to say, and this isn't a knock at Quentin Grimes, this is a knock at a lot of the players the Pistons have acquired in many years. Like that's, aside from lack of star level power, lack of 3-point shooting, right up there is the lack of availability. Guys are always hurt on this team since I've been covering them in 7 years. And Tim Hardaway Jr. has played in 70-plus games in 4 of the last 5 years. So you're getting a high volume, league average 3-point shooter who's always available to play. He was terrible in the playoffs, was a no-show in the finals, but he also averaged 14 on good 3-point shooting in the regular season. So I like the trade. I think it puts a complimentary piece around Cade, but it also helps replenish the cupboard. And I think people should remember they hear seconds, and there's no value in seconds. Well, I would argue, one, like I said, the new CBA teams are going to move into the second round as opposed to the late first. 2, when you make a trade, you have to trade something back. So that's why seconds are valuable. Like if the team wants to salary dump a first and a player to the Pistons do have to trade something back. So if you have extra seconds, that's something you can just throw in there. So there is value there.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of seconds, and this is probably like a really bad example, but Jay Crowder was traded for 5 second-round picks from the Milwaukee Bucks, and for whatever reason, Mike Budenholzer never played him, which is actually kind of hilarious. Yeah. But you can get a pretty good player. I mean, wasn't Sadiq traded for 5 second-round picks?
He was traded for 5 second-round picks. I mean, listen, we even said AJ Griffin was traded for the 44th pick. I know he had a bad year last year, but it's a guy who shot 40% from 3 as a rookie and is only 20 years old. Like that's just where we are in the league with the financial constraints. Teams are going to have to make decisions like that.
Yeah, I honestly wasn't too upset with this trade. Some Pistons fans, which I like Quentin Grimes as a player, liked him coming out of college. Mm-hmm. But you would think we just traded a 3-time All-Star. Like they were really upset with this trade. I'm like, you guys, like he's had injury histories, he's
the part that got me because he only played 6 games here. And the attachment I saw was a little nuts. But I also understand that the Pistons, for all they haven't done, what they have done is done a good job of attracting a younger fan base through drafting like Cade, through rebuilding guys like Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, Isaiah Stewart. Like they brought in more young fans, bringing back the teal jerseys. So a lot of young fans see this young player and they get attached. I understand that. But like I said, I'm a fan of Grimes. I think there's a good player there. but I also don't think this wasn't like fair value for Quentin Grimes.
Yeah,
I think it was pretty fair value.
I like it for Dallas. Like I think
Yeah.
it makes sense for Dallas. I mean, you get to play in a kind of maybe a lessened role than you would in Detroit, and you get to play with Luka and Kyrie. I think it makes sense for them, and I think for Detroit, to your point, they addressed something that they didn't do last year, and that was 3-point shooting.
Yep.
They did not make a lot of threes, and Tim Hardaway Jr., to your point, has been
And
very
yeah,
consistent.
and availability. Joe Harris and Monte Morris didn't play because of injuries.
Yeah, I mean, I saw some Pistons fans compare this to a Joe Harris trade too. I was just
That's
like, you guys, that's no, like
that's why that's different. He's not coming off a major. What did Joe Harris have? Didn't Joe Harris
calf.
like a major calf injury, like missed a whole season or something like that? Tim doesn't miss games.
Yeah, I like the trade, and I mean, I had heard, I don't know if it's true that Cade's camp really liked Tim Hardaway Jr. That was a player that Cade wanted to play with. Which, I mean, I don't know if for that to be true, but I mean, I know Cade did talk to him about his surgery, like prior to having the surgery, of like kind of like guidance to that. So there is something there.
Yeah, I don't know if that was like a player that like Cade went and pounded the table. We have to have this guy, but yeah, I wrote the story talking to Cade where he told me that Tim Hardaway was the last once Tim Hardaway told him about the shin surgery, he had the same one. He's like, once he told me that and what we talked about, like that made me feel good about it. So there is a relationship there for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I thought it was a pretty good trade. Trajan did exactly what he said he was going to do.
Yep.
And he took on a contract, a 1-year rental, if you will, to get a guy that can be an immediate impact. So I honestly like the trade.
Yeah, you could make the case that, I mean, you honestly could make the case that they upgraded the player for the short term and still kept financial flexibility for next year too. So you potentially improve the team next year while giving yourself an opportunity to rebolster the roster a year from now.